What does it mean?
ADHD?
Yeah, what is it exactly? Is it real?
If I were to stress you right now, what would be your options of dealing with that?
And then if this kid doesn't lock in like a zombie, we need to medicate them. Just watching this very disturbing commercial yesterday with children, and it was talking about ADHD, and it showed a kid that was not paying attention in class, and it showed these kids like playing around and doing things they weren't supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And then they introduced this medication. And then you have the child raising their hand, and then you have everyone clapping, and you have the child with a big smile on their face, and you've medicated your child to be a successful and integrated person in society.
Shall I spot off about ADHD for a minute?
Yes, please.
That was my first book on ADHD. And that was after I was diagnosed with it myself in my 50s.
What does it mean?
ADHD?
Yeah, what is it exactly? Is it real?
Oh, it's real.
But what does it mean?
Well,
like if someone has ADHD, it's not like you have herpes, right? Like you can say, "Oh, you got a disease."
Well,
what is it?
Well, that's the whole point, is that the medical profession and a lot of the so-called experts think about it as a disease, another one of these inherited diseases. In fact, they say it's the most heritable mental illness there is, and I say it's neither an illness nor is it heritable. So the hallmark are difficulty paying attention when you're not motivated.
Yeah.
So kind of tuning out, like that kid in the commercial.
Like me.
Okay. Poor impulse control, so that you tend to act out whatever emotion arises. And sometimes the hyperactivity, difficulty sitting still and then to fidget and all that. And that described me to a T. But as soon as I learned about the diagnosis, I knew something. This is not a disease. And it's not heritable, despite the fact that some of my kids were diagnosed with it. What is it? So tuning out is not a disease. So let me ask you a question, if I may.
Okay.
If I were to stress you right now, create stress, emotional difficulty or tension for you right now, what would be your options of dealing with that? Of dealing with me? What would be your options?
I could either get upset or I could leave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could fight back. Flight or fight, yeah? But what if you didn't have those options?
Yeah, then you're stuck.
And now what does the brain do when you're stuck like that?
It gets distracted.
It tunes out.
Yeah, it tunes out. You want to do other things, think about other things.
In other words, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, it's normal. I mean, the idea that your child, who is an 8-9-year-old ball of energy filled with hormones and life and thoughts and things they enjoy, and then you make them sit down all day in this unnatural state in a classroom with fluorescent lights and stare at a teacher that's unmotivated and underpaid and is teaching something in a very boring and non-entertaining way. And then if this kid doesn't lock in like a zombie, we need to medicate them. Yeah,
well, the other part of it is that if you look at my infancy, and it sounds like yours, we spent our first year or two under very difficult circumstances, a lot of stress. Infants can't help but absorb the stress of their parents.
Right.
They can't help it. What does an infant do? Could I have escaped or fought back? Could you have? All we could do is tune out.
Yes.
But when is this tuning out happening? When our brain is being developed.
Right.
And our brain, this is the part that nobody taught me in medical school, but it turns out that brain science now teaches us that the human brain develops under the impact of the environment. The most salient feature of the environment that shapes the circuits of the human brain is actually the relationship with the parents. And if the parents are present and emotionally attuned and available, child brains develop properly. If a family comes to me with their ADHD child, I'll say to them, what you've got here is a very sensitive child. That sensitive child is picking up on all the vibes, energies, and stresses in your family. Want to help this child? Deal with the whole family. Look at the parental relationship. Look at what stress is there in your life. Look at how you react to the child. Look at, do you understand the child's behavior or the emotions that the child is having, or are you just trying to control the child's behaviors? Look at all that.
The presence of the mother is required to maintain the chemistry of the child's brain. Now, the mother or the mothering figure, whether it's the grandfather or whoever's taking care of the child, can be absent in two ways. You can be absent physically, or you can be absent emotionally. And the psychologist Alan Shore calls that proximal separation. Proximal separation is when the parent is physically there but emotionally absent. So I could give myself as an example of that. I was quite capable of reading my children a story and had my mind somewhere else at the same time. So I'd be reading the story, but if they asked me a question, I couldn't answer it because my mind wasn't on the story. Now, what do you suppose the child makes of that? How does the child interpret that? What's that?
They don't want to be there.
They don't want to be there. I'm not available to them. They're not worthwhile. It's the only way the child can interpret it. That's what's called proximal separation. And proximal separation, given the stresses on parents these days, is a major problem in parenting. And because, as a recent study showed, when parents are stressed, they can't be attuned, connected with their kids emotionally. And the child experience them as absent. It's very confusing for the kids, by the way. Because when you try and ask them, well, my parents were always there. But nobody remembers their parents' emotional absence, because you can't remember what didn't happen. Two things, as the British psychiatrist D.W. Winnicott said, there's two things that can go wrong in childhood. Two things that can go amiss. One, if things happen that shouldn't happen, and that's the abuse and the neglect and the sexual exploitation or whatever. That's what happened that shouldn't have happened. But the other thing that can go wrong is when things don't happen that should happen. It's easy to study the factors that shouldn't have happened but did. So you can ask people, was there addiction in your family? Were your parents jailed? Did your father beat your mother? Were you abused? Those are the things that shouldn't have happened. It's harder to study, but just as important, when things didn't happen that should have. And I've talked to so many people that tell me, oh yeah, I know my parents were loving, wonderful people. And they were. But then you ask the question, when you're upset as a child, who did you talk to? Nobody. Well, that's what should have happened. Is there should have been somebody there to really see the child and to recognize the child's distress. That's often lacking. Not because the parents don't love the child or don't do their best, because they're too distracted, too stressed, or they're dealing with their own unresolved issues, or not dealing with them. I talked about attunement. Now, attunement is an important. Okay, so let me go back to brain development before I get there. So brain development. So much of that happens in the first few years of life. So 80 or 90% of the development of the brain happens after birth. By the third year of life, the end of that, the human brain is 80% adult size, or 90% adult size. The human body is only 17 or 18% adult size. There's a rapid period of development, or a period of rapid development. So there are times in the first year of life when literally every second, so consider this space of time. In that space of time, 1 billion connections are being made in the brain. So it's a highly sensitive period. And the environment decides or influences which circuits will survive and which circuits get pruned out. The babies get many more circuits than they need, many more connections than they need. It's a little jungle. If you looked at an EEG of an infant, and you didn't know it was an infant, you thought it was an adult, you would be looking at a dying person. And the brain gets totally disorganized. That's what the baby's brain is like. Except, due to the influence of the environment, all that disorganization turns into organization, and the circuits that are not needed get pruned out. That's called synaptic pruning. And the ones that need to be there get wired in and strengthened and connected and reconnected and developed into systems and circuits and so on. But all that depends and depends upon the right environmental input. Now think about tuning up. So let me answer this question. If I were to stress one of you right now, be inappropriate, physically or emotionally intrusive or aggressive, what would be your options? Well, your options would be any one of three healthy options. You could simply stand up and say, don't do that. You can just stand up and fight back and assert yourself, right? We do not. The other thing what you do is just walk out to the door and say, listen, I didn't come here to be abused. I quit this workshop. Just walk out. Your third option would be, if you couldn't do the first two, is that given that there's 50 or so people here in the room with you, you could ask for help. Or what now, if you couldn't escape, fight back, or ask for help? Then how would your brain handle it? But one of the ways your brain would handle it would be to tune it out, so that to protect yourself from the pain of it. So the tuning out, again, is a survival technique. Well, what happens if you're an infant and your parents are stressed, which means that you're stressed, because you're picking up on your parents' stresses. So that your parents are stressed and you're stressed, can you fight back, escape, or ask for help? You can't. What do? You tune out. You tune out when your brain is developing. You tune out when every second brilliant connections are being made. And then the tuning out is wired into your brain. It becomes the default setting of your brain. 7 years later, you're diagnosed with ADHD. Genetic disease. The heck it is. Furthermore, your dopamine circuits, those motivational circuits, didn't develop either. So now you need a dopamine medication like Ritalin or Dexedrine to help you focus and to get things done. Simply because the early environment was so stressed. Now, when it comes to FASD and ADHD, first of all, you can notice that all the behavioral traits of ADHD are also true of the behavioral traits of FASD. Poor impulse control, lack of emotional self-regulation, hyperactivity, low ability to concentrate. Alcohol, of course, is a toxin. It affects the brain. When it's present in large quantities, it'll have drastic effects on the physiology of the child. Heart abnormalities, facial abnormalities, brain abnormalities that you can see on brain scans, and so on. But in a lot of kids affected by the spectrum, you don't see these traits at all. You just see the behaviors and the emotional dysfunction. I think it's a mistake to assume that it's all because of the alcohol. Because, everything I've said about the parents of the child with ADHD is also true of the parents of the child with FASD. Now, any woman who drinks is by definition a stressed woman. That's why she drinks. The alcohol is her attempt to soothe her emotional pain that usually goes back to her own trauma as a child, which she's been carrying all her life. Because she was traumatized, and that's not my opinion, the large-scale studies again show that the more adversity there is in childhood, in other words, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, and all these other factors like parental absence or violence in the family and so on, the greater the risk of alcoholism, the greater the risk of obesity, the greater the risk of addiction, and so on and so forth. So the alcoholic is simply somebody who was traumatized as a child and is using the alcohol to soothe their emotional pain and to get their mind into a more acceptable state. likely, of course, if they had those experiences in childhood, they have not created for themselves a stress-free environment as adults either. More than likely, they'll be in a relationship with a male alcoholic, perhaps, or in an abusive relationship, and in many ways leading a life that's full of stress. Now, is it just the alcohol that's affecting that infant in the uterus? Heck no. It's also all the stress on the woman, for the same reasons that I've already explained. And that child is not born into a happy environment. Because if the parents are drinkers, that child is born into a highly stressed and unstable environment. So all those years of brain development are occurring under conditions of high stress, having that impact on a child's brain circuits. So what I'm saying is that the relationship between FASD and ADHD is very simple. They both come from the same source: stress in the parenting environment. So for these kids, use whatever modalities are available. Play, outdoors, the land a lot. They really need to be connected to the land. Animals, and again, above all, your presence.